Our second scripture is from Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 11. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time of peace. What gain have the workers from their toil? I have seen the business that God has given to everyone to be busy with. God has made everything suitable for its time. Moreover, God has put a sense of past and future into their minds, yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of each heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The first time I wore this shirt, it was for New West Fest in Fort Collins in 2014, 10 years ago. One of the handy people in our congregation had built a confessional booth, and I'd spent hours painting it to make it look real. We set it up in our spot and had our t-shirts on. We chose this color because we wanted to be noticed from far away. Our bright neon t-shirts all read, "As a Christian, I am sorry for actions that have hurt others in the name of God." On the back it says, "God does not hate." As we stood there, we got plenty of judgmental looks. At first, people walking by thought we were wanting them to confess to us. But when they took a second look and stopped to talk with us, we explained how we were the ones admitting to doing the harm. Dr. Harriet Lerner tells us that there are 9 essential ingredients of a true apology. It does not include the word but, keeps the focus on your actions and not on the other person's response. It includes an offer of reparation or restitution. It doesn't overdo it. It doesn't get caught up in who's more to blame or who started it. It requires that we do our best to not repeat the actions that harmed. It should not serve to silence. It shouldn't be offered to make us feel better if it risks making the hurt party feel worse. And it does not ask the hurt party to do anything, not even to forgive. That day, we did exactly that. We named the sins that we had been witness to or had been a part of in our lives. We named how the church had hurt the LGBTQ+ community over many generations. Some of us had seen friends sent off to conversion camp. Some of us had seen or been part of telling those who identified as gay that we can love the sinner but hate the sin. We named how women, disabled people, and people of color had been harmed by the church. How the church had put rules in place to keep the most powerful in power. Most of us had been directly harmed by churches in our own lives because of our identity, or our questions, or our beliefs or non-beliefs. I, as well as many others who worked that booth, had so many conversations with people who had had traumatic experiences with the church. For most, it was the first time anyone from a church had acknowledged how harmful the church can be. When we name the harm the church has done out loud, we set healing into motion. It was 2 summers after I had said yes to the call to ministry. I was working on my bachelor's degree, and even though I had recognized my calling, I still had a lot of trauma to work through, for I had been deeply hurt by the church, by the system, and by individuals, including pastors. I was still grappling with the idea of becoming a pastor. I honestly wasn't even sure how I could be one when the pastors I had grown up with had done so much harm.
Wow.
So on that day in 2014, I left, very sunburned. If you saw me last weekend, you'll know. But incredibly grateful to have been a part of bringing some healing to our community, even if none of them ever stepped foot in our church or even a church. Perhaps they understood how churches are full of humans who are, well, human. What I didn't realize until much later is that I had experienced some healing that day as well. In naming the hurts that I had witnessed or been a part of, I was able to begin naming the harm that had been done to me by systems and people in those systems. We break promises. We're hypocritical. We preach instead of listen. And we too often judge those who are not attending our church. But when we have the courage to begin naming the hurts, we're acknowledging that we are still a work in progress. We all are. And when we work to co-create with God, when we listen to God's message of love, not just for those of us here, but everyone out there as well, we can bring more healing and wholeness to a hurting world, including ourselves. It never fails. Almost every time I wear this shirt, whether it's in the grocery store, working in my yard, or picking one of my kids up from school, I'm approached by someone who needs to tell a story, or wants a hug, or has tears welled up in their eyes. We are almost 9 months into this interim time as we prepare ourselves to call the next pastor. Our revisioning team is preparing to do the deep work of creating a strategic plan that will help steer Cairn into the future. And Search and Call is doing the deep listening required to create a congregational profile to tell candidates more about who we are. Next week, we will come together as a congregation during worship to discern what scriptural story will guide us through the next few years. But first, we need to acknowledge that even after 9 months, we have some healing to do. Any church that can count the years they've been together in community by decades and even centuries, like you, can look back and understand that even the healthiest of churches has caused some harm. A church is a family system made up of many different families. And families can be, well, messy. When we're in our own families, we figure out the best way to move forward with each other. But when we are a church, we can kind of forget that we don't all deal with conflict or grief in the same way. Some of us prefer to sweep any conflict or grief under the rug. Some of us choose to put the blame on someone convenient. Some of us need to talk about it. But instead of working directly with those we need to reconcile with, we gossip. It happens. We are human, after all, with our own ways of coping. The church has too often fallen victim to these unhealthy coping mechanisms as well. But our scriptures tell of a different way of being in community together, of a life that is more whole, because we work to bring more healing to our spaces. Both of our scriptures from Ecclesiastes and Revelation are often read at memorial services, at the end of someone's life. When we hear in Revelation how God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, we're reminded of how in the beginning, when the Spirit of God hovered over the waters and life was brought into being, God called this all good, very good. And in Revelation, we're told that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Death will be no more. The end, too, shall be good, very good. But we are not called to live in the past, and we are not called to live only for the ending. We're called to live in the middle of the story. And the middle of the story is often hardly called very good. Think of any fairy tale, and the middle of the story is fraught with pain, with struggles, with dragons to overcome. The beginning of stories begins with once upon a time. And the end of the story often goes, and they lived happily ever after. But the living part, the messy middle part, is hard. And it is also good, very good. Ecclesiastes is also often used at the end of someone's life as we reflect upon that life well lived. We're told that there's a time for everything, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. But Ecclesiastes, like Revelation, is also not describing the dichotomy between good and bad. We're not told to live only for planting, or only for laughing, or only for dancing. There's a simple word that connects these phrases. Did you pick it up? And. I've spoken about the power of and before. And includes instead of excludes. And means, in the words of my therapist, everyone gets to have feelings at the same time. And that means that we are learning, loving, and growing from it all, from the beginnings through the endings, and especially in the messy middles. When it comes to messy middles, we can have a hard time verbalizing just how we are feeling. It's easier to say, I am sad, or I am in pain, when we can name the ending. It's also easy to say, I'm happy, or I am grateful, when something obviously new is beginning. But in the middle, we have really complicated feelings. We can feel anxious about the unknown. We can feel unsure about the future. We can feel happy and content one moment and then feel stressed or lonely in another moment. That's life. Perhaps that is one of the most important reasons for why I am here. Yeah, I'm here to work through many of the administrative items that need to be prepared before we call the next pastor. Things like strategic plans, updating websites, making sure our policies are up to date. But the reality is that I am really here to help us name the feelings in the messy middle. For most of us, we may not even realize how deeply we feel until we start to talk about it. Sometimes we don't understand the impact of how much we may have hurt someone until we hear someone else's story. When we want to grow, when we want to change, we must be willing to look in the mirror and hold ourselves accountable. We have to be vulnerable enough to name how we have been hurt. And in order to reconcile, to move forward, we must be willing to hear each other's stories. And so, in an echo of that day in 2014, I offer this. I am sorry. I am sorry for all the ways that you have been hurt by Christians in the name of God in the past. As a pastor and a leader, I am sorry for all the ways that you've been hurt by clergy or other leaders in the past, whether intentional or unintentional. We pastors are human, after all. We're often put up on pedestals or put ourselves up on pedestals, where we all forget that eventually we all fall down occasionally. I'm sorry that we leaders are set up to bear witness to vulnerabilities, to your worst days. And then we eventually leave you to someone else that you must make a new relationship with. I'm sorry for the ways that the church as a system has directly harmed our marginalized communities, for all the times that we have looked away from pain when we should have been bearing witness to it. I'm sorry for all the times that the church has gossiped instead of spoken directly to someone. I'm sorry for all the times we did not communicate well, or we catered to the loudest voice instead of the most vulnerable. I am sorry for the many children who heard that they were something other than beloved children of God. I hold myself accountable for all the times that I have messed up, have looked away, gotten busy, or harmed someone who needed gentleness instead. And I also name that I have been harmed by others as well. For all the times I felt that I was undeserving of God's love, of any love, of your love, my love, Christian love. I hope that today is a chance for you to begin to name the actions that you've witnessed or been a part of that have hurt others. And I hope that you can begin to name the times that you have been hurt too. I'm here after worship if you want to talk. Send me an email or give me a call if you're worshiping with us online. And there will be several opportunities during the summer for you to name any grief or hurt that you carry. For we all carry something, even if it is not something that I named directly today. Our monthly evening services will be held in June, July, and August. And from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. on those evenings, you're invited to stop by and engage in several different prayer stations. You don't have to interact with anyone, but, or maybe I should say, and I will be here should you want to talk to someone or pray with during that time. When we work to co-create with God in the messy middles, we're helping to build a kingdom that is closer to a new heaven and a new earth. And maybe there are still plenty of tears, but when we bear witness to those tears, we recognize the holiness those tears contain.